You listen to me when I am talking to you. This is my seat and you are getting up right now.
Ma'am, that is enough. Step back.
If the seat you paid for was already taken, and everyone around you silently agreed it wasn't yours to begin with. The question hung in the air long before Ethan Walker ever stepped onto that plane. Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport breathed like a living thing. Rolling suitcases rattled across polished floors. Voices overlapped. Announcements cracked through the speakers with that familiar, tired authority. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere else, a man argued into his phone like the world owed him something. Ethan moved through it all without rushing. 41 years old, average height, grey polo, dark jeans. Nothing about him demanded attention. Nothing about him warned anyone to look twice. But there was something in the way he walked, measured, controlled. Like a man who had spent too many years proving he belonged in rooms that never expected him. His phone buzzed again. He didn't check it. Not after a week like this. Board meetings that stretched past midnight. Investors asking for more. Engineers needing answers. A company worth billions balanced on decisions no one else wanted to make. Ethan had carried it all without letting it show. He always did. He paused near a terminal window. Planes taxied under the Arizona sun, heat rippling off the runway like something alive. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing, letting the noise fade into something distant. He didn't need luxury. He needed silence. A window seat. A few hours where nobody expected anything from him. No titles, no negotiations. Just distance between him and the noise. That seat meant something, not because of the price, but because of what it took to earn it. Ethan adjusted his grip on his worn leather carry-on and kept walking. Inside the Delta Sky Lounge, the world softened. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Glasses clinked gently. The chaos outside felt like it belonged to someone else. Ethan grabbed a black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and sat by the window. He didn't scroll much, just headlines, numbers, noise. One article caught his eye. Another airline apologizing, overbooking, passenger disputes, corporate statements wrapped in polished language that meant nothing. Ethan exhaled through his nose. A quiet, humorless sound. They never learn, he muttered. Not anger, not surprise, just recognition. His phone buzzed again, this time the boarding alert. He stood, finished the last sip of coffee, and straightened his jacket. No hesitation, no delay. At the gate, the energy had shifted. People crowded the boarding lanes before their groups were even called. Subtle impatience, subtle entitlement, the kind that didn't need words. That's when he noticed her. Victoria Blake, 52. Blonde hair cut sharp at the shoulders, cream blazer, pearl earrings that caught the overhead light just enough to be noticed. She stood near the priority line, one heel tapping against the floor in tight, controlled irritation. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning, measuring, judging. The kind of woman who didn't wait, the kind of woman who expected the world to move around her. Ethan glanced once, then looked away. He'd seen her before. Not her, exactly, but her type. When first class was called, Ethan stepped forward. Calm, unbothered. He handed over his phone. The gate agent scanned it without a second look. "Have a good flight, sir." He nodded once and walked down the jet bridge. The air changed immediately. Cooler, quieter, narrow. Each step closer to the aircraft felt like stepping away from everything he carried. Row 2, seat 2A, window, his seat. The one thing on this flight that belonged entirely to him. Ethan stepped into the cabin, turned left, and stopped. Someone was already sitting there. Victoria Blake didn't look up right away. She sat angled slightly towards the window, one leg crossed over the other, a glass of sparkling water resting lightly between her fingers. Her handbag was already tucked neatly beside the seat, like it had always belonged there. Everything about her posture said, settled, final, untouchable. Ethan stood in the aisle, still holding the strap of his carry-on, his body blocking the slow flow of passengers behind him. For a second, no one spoke. The hum of the cabin filled the space. Soft, controlled. But underneath it, something tightened, like a wire pulled too far. Then Victoria glanced up. Her eyes moved over him quickly. Shoes, jeans, polo, no recognition, no hesitation. Just a brief, dismissive assessment before her attention drifted back to her phone. Ethan inhaled once. Slow. "Excuse me," he said, voice even, controlled. "I think you might be in my seat." Victoria didn't move, didn't even blink. "I'm in 2A," she replied, her tone smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that ended conversations before they began. Ethan tilted his head slightly, not reacting, not escalating. "Right. And my boarding pass says the same. You might want to double-check yours." A flicker crossed her face. Not doubt, annoyance. She lifted her phone with a small, precise motion, holding it just high enough for him to see. "It says 2A. Right here." Her voice rose just enough to carry. A man in the aisle behind Ethan shifted, trying to lean around him. Another passenger slowed down, pretending to adjust her bag while watching. Ethan stepped closer, careful not to invade, but close enough to read the screen. 3C, clear as daylight. He let the silence sit there for a beat. "That says 3C, he said quietly. "Middle seat." Victoria let out a soft laugh. Short, controlled, the kind meant to embarrass. "No," she said, shaking her head like he'd just made a simple mistake. "I always sit in 2A." The word always hung in the air like it carried weight. Like the seat belonged to her, beyond the system, beyond the ticket, beyond the rules. Ethan straightened slightly. Seats don't remember people, he thought. Systems do, and systems don't care who you are. "I understand," he said, still calm, still measured. "But today, it's assigned to me." Her expression hardened. Not dramatically. Just enough. A tightening around the mouth, a slight narrowing of the eyes. "Then maybe they made a mistake," she replied, lowering her phone, her tone cooling. "It happens." Behind Ethan, the pressure in the aisle built. A suitcase wheel bumped lightly into his ankle. Someone sighed. Quiet, but intentional. Time was becoming a factor. Victoria shifted in the seat, settling deeper, as if physically anchoring herself there. Her elbow rested on the armrest like a claim. "Well," she added, glancing past him now, as if already done with the conversation, "you can take 3C. It's still first class. Problem solved." That did it. A ripple moved through the nearby rows. Not loud, not obvious, but enough. A man across the aisle raised his eyebrows. A woman 2 rows back leaned forward slightly, lips parting like she wanted to say something but didn't. Ethan didn't move, didn't raise his voice. But something in him shifted. Not anger. Something older than that. He thought of boardrooms where he'd been mistaken for support staff, of meetings where his ideas were ignored until someone else repeated them louder, of moments where belonging wasn't given, it had to be taken. This wasn't about a seat. It never was. He placed his carry-on gently on the floor beside him, freeing his hands. "With all due respect," he said, voice firmer now, lower, controlled, "I paid for this seat. 2A. I'm not moving." Victoria's eyes snapped back to him. Sharp now, evaluating again, as if seeing him for the first time, but still not really seeing him. The cabin felt tighter, closer, like the air itself was waiting, and then footsteps approached, measured, quick, authority wrapped in a uniform. Is there a problem here? The flight attendant stepped into the narrow space beside them, her smile already in place, polished and automatic. Jessica Miller, early 30s, hair pulled tight into a neat bun. Uniform pressed sharp enough to cut tension. Her eyes moved quickly between Ethan and Victoria, calculating before she even spoke. "Is there a problem here?" she repeated, tone light, but her gaze lingered a fraction longer on Ethan. Victoria exhaled like she had been waiting for this moment. "Yes," she said, turning slightly toward Jessica, her voice shifting into something softer, almost inconvenienced. "There seems to be some confusion about the seating. I'm in 2A, and he's insisting otherwise." Jessica nodded slowly, already angling her body toward Victoria, subtly aligning herself. "All right, ma'am, let me take a look," she said, extending her hand. Victoria handed over her phone with a small, controlled sigh, like this entire situation was beneath her. Jessica glanced down. Just a second too long. Her smile didn't fade, but something behind it hesitated. Ethan saw it. That flicker. Recognition. 3C. Clear. Undeniable. Jessica knew. Of course she knew. But instead of correcting it immediately, she shifted her weight slightly, her eyes lifting back up, scanning Ethan again. The jeans, the polo, the absence of anything that signaled status in a world that quietly depended on it. "Well," she began carefully, handing the phone back to Victoria, "it does look like your assigned seat is 3C. A pause. A breath. The moment where things should have ended. But they didn't. Victoria didn't move. Didn't even glance at her phone again. "That must be wrong," she said flatly. "I always sit here." Jessica's smile tightened, but she didn't push. "I understand, ma'am," she replied, her tone still soft, still accommodating. "Sometimes the system can—" "Exactly," Victoria cut in smoothly. "It's a system error." The word error landed like a convenient excuse. Jessica turned then, finally addressing Ethan directly. "Sir," she said, her voice shifting just slightly, losing some of that warmth, "would you mind showing me your boarding pass?" Ethan held her gaze for a second before reaching into his pocket. He already knew. This wasn't about verification. This was about justification. He handed over his phone without a word. Jessica scanned it. 2A. No mistake, no ambiguity. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a split second, everything was clear. Right. Wrong. Simple. And then, She chose. "Okay," Jessica said, handing the phone back, her voice measured, careful. "I do see that you're assigned to 2A. Another pause. Passengers nearby leaned in, pretending not to. The cabin had gone quiet in that particular way, the kind where people weren't just listening, they were waiting. Jessica inhaled lightly. "But to avoid any delay with boarding," she continued, her tone shifting into something more practical, more managerial, "would you be willing to take another seat? We do have a few open options in first class." There it was. Not a question, a suggestion dressed as one. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Behind him, someone shifted impatiently. A suitcase zipper scraped against metal. The pressure to move, to resolve, to not be the problem, it filled the space like heat. Victoria relaxed back into the seat, the corner of her mouth lifting just enough to be noticed. She had already won. In her mind, at least. Ethan looked at Jessica. Really looked at her. At the way she avoided direct eye contact now. At the way her shoulders angled slightly away from him. At the subtle urgency in her tone that wasn't about fairness, but convenience. "Let me understand," he said slowly, his voice calm but carrying, cutting clean through the silence. "You're asking me to give up my seat because she refuses to sit in hers." Jessica blinked. "That's not exactly." "That's exactly what it is," Ethan said, not raising his voice but tightening it, sharpening it. The words landed heavier this time. Across the aisle, a man lowered his newspaper. A woman, 2 rows back, stopped mid-scroll on her phone. The air shifted. Jessica's smile faded just a fraction. "Sir," she said, more firmly now, "we're just trying to keep things moving smoothly for everyone." Everyone, not him, everyone else. Ethan felt it settle. Clear now. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision. And he knew exactly what came next. Ethan didn't move. Not a step. Not an inch. The aisle behind him tightened as another passenger tried to squeeze past, then gave up. The quiet hum of the cabin shifted into something sharper, more focused. Eyes were no longer pretending not to watch. Jessica's smile was gone now. "Sir," she said again, a little firmer, a little less patient, "we need to resolve this so we can finish boarding." Resolve. The word sounded clean, professional. But what it really meant was simple. Move. Ethan let that sit. He looked past her, down the aisle, at the other first-class seats. Empty ones, available ones. Seats no one was being asked to give up. Seats no one else was expected to sacrifice. Then he looked back at Victoria. She hadn't moved, not even slightly. Her fingers tapped lightly against her glass, slow, rhythmic, not nervous, not uncertain, just waiting, confident that the system would bend the way it always had. Ethan had seen that before. Too many times. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice calm, steady, but carrying just enough to reach beyond Jessica. "If I were already sitting in that seat, would you be asking her to move me?" Jessica hesitated, a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "That's not the situation," she replied quickly, too quickly. "No," Ethan said, tilting his head slightly. "It's not. But the answer matters." Silence. Behind him, a man cleared his throat, shifting his weight. Another voice, lower, impatient, whispered, "Come on, we're holding everyone up." There it was, the pressure, not loud, not direct, but constant. Jessica exhaled through her nose, her patience thinning. "Sir, we have policies in place to handle seating conflicts," she said, her tone now clipped, rehearsed, And right now, the priority is getting this flight out on time. Priority. The word landed heavier than she intended. Ethan nodded slowly, like he understood. But his eyes didn't soften. So time matters more than what's right, he said. Jessica's jaw tightened. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Victoria shifted in her seat, finally turning fully toward them, her expression sharpening. This is ridiculous, she said, louder now, no longer pretending to be polite. I have somewhere to be. I don't have time for this back and forth. Her voice cut through the cabin, drawing more attention. A few heads turned fully now. No more pretending. This is first class, she continued, her tone rising just enough to carry authority. We're supposed to be treated like it. We. Not him. Never him. Ethan felt the weight of that word settle. Jessica seized the moment. Sir, she said, stepping slightly closer, lowering her voice like she was offering something reasonable, something fair. I can move you to another seat, maybe even offer a complimentary upgrade on a future flight. We just need your cooperation right now. There it was again. Not fairness, compensation, as if the seat wasn't his, as if this was a favor. Ethan looked down briefly at his hands. Steady. Always steady. He thought about the contracts waiting for him, the meetings, the people who depended on him showing up exactly as he was, unshaken, precise. Then he looked back up. No, he said. One word, flat, final. Jessica blinked. I'm not moving, Ethan continued, his voice low but unmistakable. That's my seat. I paid for it. I chose it. And I'm sitting in it. The cabin went still. Not quiet. Still. Like something had shifted beneath the surface. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. Jessica straightened, the last layer of politeness peeling away. Sir, she said, her tone now formal, distant. If you refuse to comply with crew instructions, we may have to escalate this. Escalate. Another clean word. But everyone knew what it meant. Removal. Security. Consequences. Ethan didn't react, didn't flinch. He just held her gaze. Then do what you need to do, he said. The words landed like a weight in the aisle. Heavy. Unmovable. Jessica stared at him for a second longer, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for anything she could use to push this back under control. She didn't find it. Behind her, Victoria let out a quiet, satisfied exhale. And that was the moment it crossed the line. Not a misunderstanding anymore. Not a delay. A decision had been made. And now it was going to cost someone. Jessica didn't argue again. She stepped back. Not retreating. Resetting. Her hand moved to the interphone near the galley, fingers pressing buttons with controlled precision. Her face had changed. The softness was gone. What remained was procedure, distance, authority without warmth. Captain, we have a situation in first class, she said quietly, but not quietly enough. The word situation traveled. It moved through the cabin like a ripple. Subtle but sharp. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones tilted just enough to capture better angles without being obvious. Ethan stood exactly where he was. Still. Unmoved. Victoria shifted slightly in the seat, crossing her legs again, reclaiming her posture. Her eyes no longer avoided him. Now she watched openly, measuring, waiting for the system to correct what she believed was an inconvenience. Across the aisle, a man in his 60s lowered his reading glasses, studying Ethan with quiet curiosity. A woman 2 rows back leaned toward her husband, whispering something that ended with a small shake of her head. Not sympathy, uncertainty. Jessica stepped away from the interphone and returned, her expression locked in place. "He's on his way," she said. Not to Ethan, to the situation. Seconds stretched, the kind that felt longer than they were. Then footsteps, measured, heavy, unhurried. Captain Daniel Harris entered the cabin like he belonged to every inch of it. 55, silver at the temples, posture straight, shoulders squared from decades of command. His presence shifted the air immediately. Conversations died, movement slowed. Authority didn't need to announce itself. It walked in. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, his voice calm, controlled but carrying weight. Jessica spoke first. "Passenger refusing to relocate from a seating conflict, sir," she said. Precise, neutral. Clean language. No bias, no context. Ethan noticed that. Of course he did. Captain Harris turned his attention to Ethan. A quick scan. Shoes, jeans, polo. Assessment made in seconds. "Sir," he said, stepping closer. "I understand there's been some confusion. We need you to cooperate with the crew so we can depart on time." Need, not ask, not request. Ethan met his eyes. "No confusion," he said. "That's my seat." A beat. Captain Harris shifted his weight slightly, glancing toward Jessica, then Victoria. Victoria leaned forward just enough to enter the exchange. "I've already explained," she said smoothly. "There's been a mix-up. I always sit here." Captain Harris nodded once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. But it was enough. He turned back to Ethan. "Sir, we can accommodate you elsewhere in first class," he said. "There's no need to hold up the entire flight over a single seat." There it was again, minimizing, reducing, as if the principle didn't matter, as if the seat was interchangeable. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not anger, clarity. "Then move her," he said. The words were simple, direct, and they landed harder than anything before. Jessica inhaled sharply. Victoria's expression snapped, just for a fraction of a second. Captain Harris didn't react immediately. He studied Ethan, longer this time, as if recalculating. "Sir," he said finally, his tone dropping a degree colder. "I'm giving you a reasonable solution. Take it." Ethan didn't look away. "I already have one," he replied. "It's right there." He nodded toward the seat. 2A. The space between them tightened, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Behind them, someone shifted again. A phone lifted higher, a quiet click as a video started recording. Jessica noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the movement, then back. Too late. The moment had already crossed into something else. Captain Harris exhaled slowly. Patience thinning. "Sir," he said, voice firm now, unmistakable, "if you continue to refuse crew instructions, we will have no choice but to involve airport security." There it was. Not implied anymore. Spoken. Clear. Heavy. The word security didn't just land. It echoed. Across rows, across faces, across assumptions. Ethan felt it. Not the threat, The familiarity. He had been here before. Different room, different people. Same pattern, same decision waiting to be made. He adjusted his stance slightly, grounded, unshaken. And when he spoke, his voice was lower than before, quieter, but somehow stronger. Then call them. No one expected him to say that. Not like that. Not without hesitation. The words didn't sound defiant. They didn't sound emotional. They sounded certain. And that was what made them dangerous. Captain Harris held his gaze for a second longer, as if waiting for the crack. The shift. The moment where Ethan would reconsider, soften, step back into something easier to manage. It didn't come. Jessica's fingers tightened around the tablet in her hand. She glanced at the captain, a silent question passing between them. This had gone further than planned, further than convenient. Victoria leaned back, slowly, her lips curling into something close to satisfaction. Not a smile, something colder, the kind of expression that comes from being right too many times in a row. "Unbelievable," she muttered, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, holding up an entire flight over a seat. A few quiet nods followed. Not loud, not unified, but enough. A man across the aisle shifted in his seat, crossing his arms. "It's not worth it," he said under his breath. Not to Ethan, not to anyone specifically, but loud enough to exist. The pressure built again. Subtle. Relentless. Captain Harris straightened. "Jessica," he said, not looking away from Ethan, "go ahead and contact ground." That was it. The line crossed. No more discussion. Jessica nodded once and turned, already reaching for her radio. "Ground security. We need assistance at gate." Her voice faded slightly as she stepped toward the galley, but the meaning stayed behind. Security was coming. The cabin shifted again. Phones rose higher now. No more pretending. No more subtlety. A woman in the second row angled her screen directly toward Ethan. A younger man near the aisle leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching like this was something he'd tell people about later. Victoria adjusted her jacket, smoothing it down like she was preparing for something formal. Something expected. Ethan noticed everything, every glance, every shift, every quiet agreement that didn't need words. He let it all settle. Then he reached into his pocket, slow, deliberate. No sudden movements, no urgency, just control. His phone came out, screen already lit from earlier notifications, missed calls, messages, names that carried weight in other rooms, other conversations, other worlds. None of that mattered here, not yet. He scrolled once, stopped, tapped, raised the phone to his ear. No one spoke. Even the low hum of the cabin felt like it had pulled back. "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice calm, level, almost casual. "I need you to get someone from Executive Ops on the line." A pause. His eyes lifted, moving briefly across Jessica, then the captain. "Now," he added. Not louder, just sharper. On the other end, a voice responded, too faint to make out, but immediate. Ethan listened for a second, then spoke again. "Flight from Phoenix to Dallas. Boarding. We've got a situation." He didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't need to. His tone did all of that for him. Captain Harris watched him closely now. Something had shifted. Not visibly, but enough. Jessica returned from the galley, her radio clipped back into place. "They're on their way," she said. Then she noticed the phone. The call. The tone. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Sir, you need to end that call," she said, stepping closer. "You're not allowed to make." Ethan raised a finger. Not aggressive, not dismissive, just enough to stop the sentence. And it worked. Jessica froze. For half a second. But half a second was all it took. Ethan turned slightly, giving his shoulder to the aisle, his voice dropping just enough to make the words harder to catch. "I want names," he said into the phone. "Everyone involved." Another pause, a response. Ethan nodded once. "Good." He pulled the phone away slowly, ended the call, then slipped it back into his pocket like nothing had happened, like none of this mattered. But the air had changed. Completely. Captain Harris felt it. He didn't know what exactly had just shifted, but something had. And for the first time since he stepped into that aisle, he wasn't entirely in control anymore. The footsteps came faster this time. Not measured like the captain's, not polished like the crew. These were heavier. Direct, purpose-driven. 2 airport security officers appeared at the entrance of the cabin, their presence cutting through the air like a blade. Dark uniforms, utility belts, eyes trained to assess before speaking. Everything stopped. Conversations, movements, even the quiet judgment that had been floating through the rows. Now it had a center. "Ethan." "Sir," the lead officer said, stepping forward, his voice calm but firm. "We've been informed there's a situation." Captain Harris turned slightly, relieved to hand it off. "Passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions," he said, tone clipped, efficient. "We need him removed so we can proceed with departure." Removed. The word landed harder this time. Not theoretical anymore. Real. The second officer shifted position slightly behind the first, creating a subtle barrier. Not aggressive, but deliberate, controlled space, controlled outcome. Ethan didn't move. He looked at them the same way he had looked at everyone else. Level, present, unshaken. "Can I see your boarding pass, sir?" the lead officer asked. Ethan nodded once and handed over his phone. No resistance, no hesitation. The officer studied it carefully. 2A. He glanced up, then towards Jessica, then Victoria. Something didn't align. "What's the issue?" the officer asked, this time not assuming. Jessica stepped in quickly. "There's been a seating conflict," she said, her voice tight, controlled. "We've offered alternative accommodations, but he's refusing to cooperate." Carefully worded, clean, but incomplete. The officer's eyes returned to Ethan. "Sir." Ethan took a breath. Slow. Measured. "I paid for that seat," he said. "She didn't. That's the issue." Simple. No performance. No emotion layered over it. Just fact. The officer looked at Victoria. She held his gaze without flinching. "There's clearly been a mistake," she said, her tone confident, practiced. "I've been seated here the entire time. I'm not moving because someone else thinks they belong here." Think. The word hung there, subtle, sharp. The officer shifted slightly, processing. Behind him, more phones were up now. No hiding, no pretending. A quiet digital audience building in real time. Captain Harris stepped forward again, impatience creeping into his voice. "Officer, we don't have time for a full investigation," he said. "We need this resolved immediately. Immediate. Fast, clean." The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked back down at the boarding pass, then at Ethan, then at the seat. 2A, occupied. But not by the name on the screen. He exhaled slowly. "We can verify this at the gate," he said finally, his tone neutral. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft with us so we can sort this out properly." There it was. Not force, not yet, but direction. Move. Ethan didn't answer immediately. The cabin held its breath. Victoria relaxed slightly, the tension leaving her shoulders. This was the part she understood, the system correcting itself. Ethan looked at the officer, then at the aisle, then back at the seat. 2A. He thought about everything that had led here. Not just today. Years. Rooms. Moments where walking away had been the easier option, the safer one, the expected one. His jaw tightened just slightly. Then he reached down and picked up his carry-on. Slow. Controlled. The movement sent a ripple through the cabin. A shift, some relief, some disappointment, some quiet confirmation of what people already believed. He stepped forward. The officers gave him space, not escorting, not touching, but guiding. As Ethan moved into the aisle, he paused. Just for a second. He turned his head slightly. Not toward the officers, not toward the captain, toward Victoria. Their eyes met. For the first time, there was something different in his. Not anger, not defeat. Something colder. Something certain. "You're sitting in the wrong seat," he said quietly. Not a warning, not a threat, a statement. Then he turned and walked. The cabin door closed behind him with a dull, final sound. The noise of the aircraft faded, replaced by the open hum of the terminal. Brighter, louder, less controlled. But somehow, it felt quieter than what he had just left behind. Ethan stepped onto the jet bridge without looking back. The officers walked beside him, not close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore. Professional distance, controlled presence. "You're not under arrest," the lead officer said, almost out of habit. "We just need to verify a few things." Ethan nodded once. "I understand." His voice hadn't changed, still level, still calm. Inside the terminal, a small crowd had already formed. Passengers from earlier boarding, airport staff, a few people holding phones a little too high, pretending not to record. News traveled fast, faster when it felt unfair. "Is that him?" someone whispered. "The guy from first class?" "Yeah, they made him leave." The words drifted, low but clear. Ethan heard them. He didn't react. The officers guided him toward a quieter corner near the gate desk. A supervisor was already there. Mid-40s, navy blazer, name tag slightly tilted. Karen Doyle. She looked up as they approached, her expression already set in that careful, corporate neutrality. "What's going on?" she asked. The officer handed over the phone. "Seat dispute," he said. "Boarding pass shows first class, seat 2A. Passenger was asked to move. He refused." Karen took the phone. Her eyes scanned the screen. 2A. Her fingers paused. Just for a second. Then she looked up at Ethan. "Sir," she said, her tone measured, rehearsed. "There seems to be a discrepancy between your boarding pass and what the crew is reporting." Discrepancy. Another clean word. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. "There's no discrepancy," he said. "There's a decision." Karen held his gaze. Professional, controlled. But something in her eyes shifted. Not doubt, awareness. "Let's verify this through the system," she said quickly, turning toward the gate computer. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up the flight manifest. Names populated the screen. Rows, seats, assignments. Her eyes scanned. Stopped. 2A. Ethan Walker. She blinked once, then leaned closer. Checked again. Same result. No error. No overlap. No confusion. Behind her, the officers exchanged a brief glance. They saw it too. Karen straightened slowly. The neutrality in her posture cracked just slightly. "Sir," she said, turning back to Ethan, her voice lower now, "it does appear that you are assigned to seat 2A. Appear. Still careful. Still guarded. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Karen exhaled quietly, then reached for the phone on the desk. "Get me the captain," she said. Not a request, a directive. Seconds passed. The line connected. "Yes, Captain Harris," she said, her tone shifting instantly. Tighter. More precise. "We have a confirmed seat assignment here. Passenger Ethan Walker is ticketed for 2A. A pause. She listened. Her expression changed. Subtle, but visible. "No," she said, firmer now. "There's no system error. The seat is his." Another pause. Longer. Whatever was being said on the other end, it wasn't simple. Karen glanced at Ethan, then turned slightly away. "Then you need to correct it," she said quietly. Silence. Then she pulled the phone away, ended the call. The air around them shifted again. Different this time. Sharper. More focused. The officers stood straighter. The crowd leaned in, closer. Something was happening. Ethan reached into his pocket. Not rushed. Not reactive. He pulled out his phone again, checked the screen. 3 missed calls. 1 new message. He opened it. Read it once. No expression. Then locked the phone. Karen watched him now. Carefully. "You said there was a decision," she said. Ethan looked at her. For the first time, there was something behind his calm. Not anger. Not frustration. Authority. "They made one," he said. "Now it's my turn." And somewhere back on that aircraft, everything was about to change. Back on the aircraft, the atmosphere had shifted, but no one could quite explain why. It wasn't louder. It wasn't chaotic. It was tighter. Like something invisible had entered the cabin and taken a seat no one could see. Jessica stood near the galley, her tablet held a little too firmly in her hands. She kept glancing toward the front, toward seat 2A, then back toward the door. Waiting. For what, she didn't know. Victoria, however, looked completely at ease. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer, lifted her glass again, and took a slow sip like the situation had already resolved itself. Around her, a few passengers had settled back into their seats, but their eyes still drifted forward, drawn to the empty space Ethan had left behind. Seat 2A occupied, but not claimed. Captain Harris stood near the cockpit entrance, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. On the surface, everything was under control. Boarding had paused. The disruption had been removed. Procedure had been followed. But something didn't sit right, not yet. A chime broke the silence. Sharp, immediate. The interphone, Jessica flinched slightly, then reached for it. "Jessica speaking," she said. She listened. Her posture changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. Yes, he was removed, she replied, glancing toward the captain. We're preparing for departure. Another pause. Longer this time. Her fingers tightened around the receiver. I understand, she said, slower now. Then she turned. Captain, she called, her voice no longer steady. You need to take this. Harris frowned, stepping forward. What is it? Just take it. He took the receiver. Captain Harris. Silence. Then his expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes narrowed slightly, focusing on something far beyond the cabin. Yes, sir, he said. Not to a passenger, not to staff, to someone above him. Higher. The word carried weight, the kind that changed outcomes. Passengers noticed. Of course they did. A man in row 3 leaned forward. A woman near the aisle lowered her phone just enough to watch more closely. Even Victoria's hand paused mid-air, glass hovering inches from her lips. Harris listened. Longer now. Then spoke again. No, sir. We were informed there was a seating conflict, and... He stopped. Cut off. His jaw tightened. Yes, sir. Understood. Another pause, short, final. When he lowered the receiver, the cabin felt different. Not tense, not uncertain. Directed. He turned immediately. Jessica, he said, his voice sharp now, stripped of all earlier patience. Where is the passenger currently? Jessica blinked. At the gate, with security. Get him back on this aircraft. The words landed like a crack through glass. No room for interpretation. No room for delay. Jessica froze. But the situation was already. Now, Harris said, louder, cutting her off, and clear seat 2A. Silence. Complete. Total. Every eye in first class was now fully locked on the exchange. Victoria's expression faltered, just slightly. Excuse me, she said, her voice no longer smooth, no longer controlled. What do you mean, clear seat 2A? Harris turned to her, and for the first time since he stepped into this situation, he didn't accommodate. He didn't soften. Ma'am, he said, his tone formal, distant, final. You need to gather your belongings and move to your assigned seat immediately. Victoria stared at him, waiting for the correction, the explanation, the reversal. It didn't come. There must be some mistake, she said, her voice tightening. I've already been seated. You were never assigned this seat, Harris replied. Flat, cold, irreversible. Jessica stood, frozen, her mind racing, trying to catch up to a reality that had just shifted under her feet. What changed? She whispered. Harris didn't answer right away. He looked toward the door, toward the jet bridge, toward the man who was no longer there. Then back at Jessica, and when he spoke, his voice was lower, controlled, but edged with something new. You have no idea who that passenger is. And neither did anyone else. Not yet. Ethan stepped back onto the aircraft, like nothing had happened. No rush. No anger. No need to prove anything. The cabin felt different now. Quieter, but heavier. Every set of eyes that had once dismissed him now followed him without blinking. Phones were still raised, but no one tried to hide it anymore. This wasn't curiosity now. It was recognition. Jessica stood frozen near the aisle, her tablet lowered, her posture no longer controlled. The confidence she wore earlier had slipped, replaced by something uncertain. Careful. Captain Harris waited just inside the cabin, his stance rigid, his expression tightened into something formal, respectful, too respectful. "Mr. Walker," he said as Ethan approached, his voice measured, stripped of all earlier authority. "I want to personally apologize for what happened." Ethan didn't stop walking, didn't acknowledge it. Not yet. He moved past him, down the aisle, each step steady, unhurried, like the moment belonged to him now, like it always had. Victoria was already out of the seat, standing, her composure fractured just enough to show through. Her bag clutched tighter than before, her shoulders no longer relaxed. She stepped aside as Ethan approached, her eyes searching his face for something. Recognition, permission, anything. She found nothing. Ethan stopped beside the seat. 2A. Exactly where it had always been. Exactly where it had always been. His. He placed his carry-on in the overhead compartment with a quiet, controlled motion, then turned and sat down. No ceremony. No statement. Just action. The cabin held its breath. Victoria lingered for a second longer, like she wanted to say something, to explain, to recover control. But there was nothing left to say. She turned and walked toward row 3. Seat 3, the seat that had always been hers. Jessica stepped forward again, slower this time, every movement calculated. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice lower now. "Careful." "We sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. If there's anything we can do to make this right." Ethan looked up. Just once. That was enough. Jessica stopped mid-sentence. Her words didn't disappear. They lost meaning. Captain Harris cleared his throat behind her. "The executive team has been notified," he added, his tone precise. "They are fully aware of the situation." Ethan leaned back slightly in his seat. Finally. Still calm, still consoled, but now there was no mistaking it. Power didn't need to raise its voice. It didn't need to explain itself. It just shifted the room. "I'm sure they are," Ethan said. Simple, flat, final. Silence followed. Not empty. Full. Every passenger felt it. The weight of what had just happened. The realization settling in layers, assumptions collapsing quietly, one by one. Across the aisle, the older man with the reading glasses slowly folded them and set them down. His expression had changed. Not just surprise. Respect. The woman 2 rows back lowered her phone, her lips pressed together, eyes thoughtful now instead of curious. And Victoria. She sat rigid in her new seat, staring straight ahead, her earlier certainty gone. The space around her felt smaller somehow, tighter. Boarding resumed. But no one spoke. The plane didn't feel like the same place anymore. Jessica moved through the cabin again, offering drinks, adjusting bags, but her movements were different now. Slower, more aware. Every interaction measured, careful not to repeat the mistake that had just rewritten everything. Captain Harris returned to the cockpit without another word. Control had returned. But it wasn't his anymore. Ethan rested his arm against the window, eyes drifting toward the runway as the aircraft began to push back. The engines hummed to life, low and powerful, vibrating through the frame. For the first time since boarding, he allowed himself a breath, Not relief, not satisfaction, just stillness. Because this had never been about winning. It had been about not moving. Outside, the sun reflected off the wing, bright and unfiltered. Inside, the silence held. And somewhere between that moment and takeoff, everyone on that plane understood something they wouldn't forget. Not everything that looks ordinary is powerless, and not everyone who stays calm is someone you can move. If this story stayed with you, take a second to like and subscribe for more stories that matter, and drop 3 words in the comments. Know your worth.